microphones when we're not speaking. I think we've all seen how destructive that can be. So if you can really mute, please do mute. And if you need to comment or ask a question or anything, please kindly use the chat or remember to raise your hand. And if you have any issues or if you're experiencing any technical problems, please do contact us at Secretariat in the chat or write to connect@a2ii.org. And I see most of you also have my email. You can also just quickly contact me there. So for today, our agenda is really looking at the applying the gender lens. So Manoj will be taking us through an interactive session on gender and climate. And then we'll also be having a case study, and I think we have one extra session trying to look at questions gathered from yourselves. I'm not sure we have much gathered so far, but this session will keep it open so that if you have any questions from the modules, when you're going through the modules on any specific topic and you'd like clarification on this, so this will be the opportunity for you to just ask those questions away, and the trainers and our experts will be here to provide you with guidance or answers to those questions. And then after that, we'll have our evaluations as usual. So right now, as usual, we do the key takeaways, and I'll invite Harry to just take on this session. Harry, please welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Monica. Thank you, everybody. Welcome to our, I think, the fourth session today, including the boarding. So we hope that you have enjoyed this program. Very, very topical, very interesting. I think we have the coffee's intervention on a regular basis, and also other people sharing their views, the speakers, Manoj, and others who have been involved here. So please do so. Take the opportunity to share your whatever is happening in your country, in your jurisdiction. Okay. So by doing so, you allow us to understand what's happening and what are the incoming challenges, and how you want to go about to tackle those issues. In so doing, by tackling those issues, the solution you are provided becomes the best practices in a sense. Okay, so just before we move on, I would like to invite the participant, please contribute. And what was it, something that caught your mind, caught your attention from the last time sessions? And feel free to air your views. We really appreciate that. That'll give us feedback. You've been listening, and also you want to be engaging and sharing your views. What was the key takeaway from last year's session? Anybody? Nothing. Yeah. Monica. So
Yeah,
there was nothing. Monica, there was nothing interesting. I think from last week.
Yeah, I'm also wondering. Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
Kutemba,
I think
please go ahead.
Kutemba, yes, please.
Thank you very much. For me, last time was actually the most interesting because I was now catching up with work. I had remained, so at least I was able to understand and relate mobile insurance to the activity. So what stood out for me was how important when you are looking at products, you look at what definition, for example, your microinsurance regulation kind of describe what would be a microinsurance product, and you relate it to a particular product that somebody would bring, especially from a regulatory point of view. For me, that actually stood out. But also, it's how all these issues are interconnected. For example, we have had institutions walk in and say they want to release this product, but then you look at who indeed is the underwriter, you find that it's an insurer who might not be in the picture, so that could create confusion. So it's very important to unmask exactly who's the underwriter and who is basically offering the platform. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kutemba. Very interesting. I think you have pointed out those key issues that was raised during the workshop. So the products, you look at the definition of the microinsurance product, and the issues are interconnected, and also like what institutions are defining the role. They need to be clarity of responsibility of the role of institution. In particular, there was not overlapping, multiple institutions involved. So you need to be clear who's the responsibility and who's oversight, and in particular which product and who's to turn to when things go wrong. Okay, thank you, Kutemba. We take I think there's still Kutemba's hand. I want to take that before I'll give 1 minute. Otherwise, we can proceed to your opening session, Monica. Anybody else? Otherwise, you'll be saying we're only favoring only one person. So please share your views. It's important.
Yeah, you
You
could
don't
also
need to.
just throw something in the chat if you don't want to speak. It's also
Yeah.
good to know from the chat what you've, at least your takeaways from last week.
Yeah. Anybody? Any takers? Anyone would like to share their views? Okay, I don't think, Monica, I think we can proceed to the next part. So thank you, everybody. We hope that you enjoy the session today. And most importantly, listening, being quiet doesn't help. Please feel free to engage. Okay, thank you, Monica. I'll leave it to you. Please proceed.
Thank you, Harry. As Harry has just said, I will also emphasize, please feel free to participate, share, and engage. It's good when we have the interactive sessions amongst ourselves. So next, I'd like to invite Manoj. He'll be taking us through the next session on gender and the climate risk. Manoj.
Thanks,
Would you
Monica.
like to take control of the slides?
I will take control of the slides.
Great.
Thank you. Yeah. All right. So thank you. So as Monica mentioned, this session today would essentially look at women's challenges around women's access to insurance, putting it in perspective of inclusive insurance, building upon your learnings from the gender modules that you have done through your self-paced learning modules. And then the second part of the session would focus on some basics around regulating index insurance solutions. And then we will have a short presentation also from Renata, our colleague, on examples from the CIMA region and an example in Senegal from the Inclusive Insurance Lab. So to begin with, the way I have foreseen the session, the next hour and a half, is that there'll be about 15-20 minutes of me taking you through the slides on gender and gender impact of climate change. And maybe we could take 10 to 15 minutes to just reflect on women's access to insurance issues. And I would very much like to hear from all of you how you look at these challenges in your jurisdiction, what you see are some of the challenges in women's access to insurance. And after that session, we could then focus on index insurance solutions, climate risk insurance solutions. So with that, we'll get started. Okay. Just give me a second. So gender equity in insurance. We have been hearing that women's access to insurance or women as a customer for insurance services offer a major business opportunity. IFC, the International Finance Corporation, the sister organization of the World Bank, about a decade ago projected that the annual market opportunity for insurance industry globally is for about 1.4 to 1.7 trillion US dollars. And that's essentially the potential of this business growing, focusing more on getting more women access to insurance per se. In addition to this, there have been projections made that an increase in GDP due to gender parity could translate into an additional 2.1 trillion US dollars being added to global insurance premiums by 2029. However, that's one side of the coin where we have such huge opportunity and potential in serving women through insurance solutions. But we have also come to the fact, accept the fact that only 23% of all reinsurance or insurance company executives are women, less than 10% of all CEOs, and about 8% of all board chairs globally for the insurance industry in the Fortune 500 insurance companies comprise of women. In addition to this, just reflecting at the economic fallout of the COVID pandemic, and climate change, which is going to be the biggest reality of our lives going forward. There is enough evidence to suggest that it's women who get disproportionately affected by the manifestations of climate insurance as compared to men. So we do see that there is a tremendous opportunity. We also see that women generally take a higher brunt of life cycle risks or climate risks going forward. But how big is that gap? How much are women behind, so to say, in terms of accessing insurance? And the short answer is that we don't know. Currently, no data sets exist anywhere which tell us how many men as compared to women, or how many women as compared to men are being served by insurance companies. And one of the more insightful thoughts that I have had, and this was during when I was part of the A2IA, is that whenever in any training or capacity building program, either with regulators or with industry specialists or the like, we have asked them to think about a default insurance customer. Almost always it's a male. So that goes to show the default customer to being the man or the male, and not really having, in terms of numbers, if there is a gendered gap of access to insurance between men and women. We are in a situation where we have very limited information on this topic. And so there is clearly a lack of gender disaggregate data. So basically, for any industry, so to say, let's say how many life insurance products are there, maybe 60% of that goes to men and 40% to women. We do not know. Such data generally doesn't exist. And the best examples we have had was from the Microinsurance Network's landscape study from 2021. And there also, we found that more than 50% of all insurance and inclusive insurance service providers didn't capture the gender data. So they did not really capture if the customer is male or female. And that is more so true for digitally delivered solutions as well. So obviously there are challenges in collecting gender disaggregated data. Practitioners tell us that, it's about definitions and how insurers collect data around customer privacy, the cost of collecting such data. So essentially, you are just asking to another box to be created in the data capturing process, and that could actually have a cost implication for service providers and the like. But how big is the cost benefit assessment? Currently, we are operating in a situation where we have no idea, at least no tangible, credible idea of how far behind, or maybe we don't know, maybe ahead, women are as compared to men when it comes to accessing insurance. But why is it important to have this disaggregation of data between men and women as customers? Well, if we don't have gender disaggregated data, some of the very basic questions we can't answer, like what products and services women value or need more as compared to men. We currently don't have an understanding of that. Do women prefer health insurance more than men? We do not know. What about pension solutions that life insurance companies also offer? What about other kind of insurance solutions or life cycle solutions? More importantly, which is the most profitable or effective distribution channel that reaches women? Is it the agency channel? Is it the technology-driven channels that are getting a lot of traction? Or do women we do not know. We do not know exactly what distribution channels women prefer. And about any other process, like What are the best channels of reaching women as customers when you are doing your marketing or customer education and awareness? We do not know that because we are not collecting that data. We also do not know if women as compared to men have greater challenges in making claims or something to that effect. All these things we do not know because we do not have disaggregated data. So clearly there are gender diverse constraints when it comes to access to insurance. And I have just listed some of the few most obvious constraints that women, especially from emerging markets in Africa, MENA region, Asia Pacific, and Latin American and Caribbean markets face. Uh, we know that women are 9% less than men likely to have identification documents in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, this lack of identification or proof of asset ownership could be a big hindrance in them having access to insurance for themselves or for the businesses that they run or for the farming that they do. GSMA, the industry body for mobile network operators, presented recently in their data that women are 8% less likely to have access to a mobile phone and 20% less likely to be accessing mobile internet over a smartphone. Now, that's a systemic concern because if women by default are not equitable or equal in accessing mobile phones or internet over mobile phones, then the solutions that you're trying to sell through using mobile phones or smartphones and the like will suffer from that systemic gap that is there, which is borne out by data. Most importantly, these are the socio-cultural constraints which define what kind of insurance channels or sources of information may work for women or may not work for women. In India, a study that I was a part of a few years ago found that women tend to trust other women when it comes to getting more information on financial services product. So not just insurance, but other kind of banking services and the like. We have also seen constraints where women generally find it difficult to go to male dominated places such as markets in a lot of markets. So if the point of sale for that insurance, maybe the office of the insurance company or the agency sales point of the insurance product is in a marketplace or in a place which is male dominated, women might find it may find it more daunting to go and buy insurance at such places. So clearly, we have to be aware of these socio-cultural constraints, which have a huge manifestation in terms of how easy or difficult it is for women to access insurance. And limited representation is a factor as well, as I previously mentioned. Not enough women make up the rank and file of insurance companies at all levels, whether it is managers or staff members or at board chairs. And this is Fortune 500. It's not just markets or companies which operate in emerging markets. This is globally speaking. And that has an effect because if there are not enough women decision makers out there, there might not be enough thought going on in identifying women as a specialized or a unique customer segment, which could be serviced through the insurance services that these companies do provide. So this brings us to the distinction between what it means to be gender neutral versus gender aware. All the work that I have done with insurance regulators and everything, it is tacitly stated that all the regulations that we put out are gender neutral, which means to say is that we do not design our regulations or policy in a manner from a gendered context, or we don't take a gender lens. What we put out there essentially is that something that will be good for the market. That's generically speaking, and there is not enough nuance put in there, understanding the kind of challenges that might exist in the market. And that again, I would refer you back to that example of defaulting to the male customer as the default customer for any insurance product or service. So in my opinion, gender neutral is essentially defaulting to men as your default customer. And this is a challenge. In a lot of ways, gender neutral approach to insurance products and services, insurance regulators tends to unintentionally overlook gender specific needs or constraints, some of which we saw on the previous slide. Uh, uh, Again, women have unique risks, whether it in terms of their health or life cycle needs. There is enough data to prove now that women are going to outlive men across all geographies and markets. Now, clearly that calls for different kind of insurance services for that particular target group. But a gender neutral product is not factoring in those uniqueness when it comes to women as the customer. I've already mentioned the disproportionate impact of disaster risks and climate risk manifestation on women as compared to men. So what do we need to do? We need to again collect and support the use of sex disaggregated data. What we are trying to say here is that by promoting the collection and then using sex disaggregated data for policy making could be the first solid step towards becoming more gender aware, either as insurance players or insurance regulators. And A2II has a gender disaggregation toolkit called the FEMA meter, which we are piloting in a few markets with insurance regulators, such as in Nepal, where we have developed a simple Excel-based tool where we collect gender disaggregated data on some of the key lines of business, as well as representation of women employees in a company, as well as the regulators themselves. Something that you might, a part of it you would have seen in the gender modules as well, where you must have done a self-assessment of how gender mainstreamed you are as an organization. There is a need for encouraging women's representation in leadership roles in insurance industry, as well as supervisors, addressing gender difference in access to identification documentation, digital channels, and the like. There needs to be greater focus on pushing those distribution channels, pushing those products and services or documentation requirements which are more fair to women, given the socioeconomic constraints that they might face. It is important to integrate gender dimensions into inclusive insurance, into national financial inclusion strategies that more and more countries are putting in place. And of course, encouraging gender considerations to be a fundamental part of the insurance product's life cycle, starting with the market research itself and then distribution strategy and everything. So right from the first time a product is conceptualized and a market research is being done for it, gender considerations need to be a key part of making sure that the product fact features you're looking to introduce do incorporate the kind of do incorporate solutions to the gendered constraints that women may face when accessing such solutions, as and when those products get into the market. So before I move forward, maybe we could take a pause here, and let me just ask all the participants to just also think back through the self-paced modules on gender that you have gone through. Anybody could share like the key insights that you had, or an aha moment that you had while going through those modules, and how does it actually speak vis-a-vis to the situation that you see in your markets? It would be great to have a couple of points in here. Please feel free to also type into the chat if that may be easier. Or something that you did not like or you did not agree with on the modules, or whatever that I had to say thus far. Chimuka, yes, I see your hand. Please go ahead.
Okay, so something I was trying hard to understand was whether or not being gender neutral is a good thing. Or if it's bad, then are we saying we should be gender biased, where we, as we make decisions, as we design products in our markets, we should desist from being gender neutral. So I'm finding it hard to really see how fair it is if we were to not be neutral and instead kind of be biased towards one gender or the other. So
fair point. Fair point. Fair question.
Yeah. So I tried. I failed to really understand it clearly. So I would love to have some more kind of
Sure.
clarification there.
Sure. So let me try to answer that. Hopefully, I will be able to speak to some of your concern there. So you're absolutely right. Is gender biased the response to being gender neutral? And my answer is no. We do not need to create a bias for any of the genders in there. But I think gender neutral itself has an inbuilt bias because it defaults towards men as the default customer. And that, in a way, creates greater bias against women, especially from the emerging markets. What I mean to, and hence, the right term to use would be becoming more gender aware. And just like I mentioned, for example, I mean, it's a fact that women have lesser access to smartphones or feature phones as compared to men. Now, if you as a regulator, for example, pass a gender neutral regulatory policy or a recommendation or a guideline without not taking this fact into account, are you not creating a bias against women because they do not have, because they are systemically rather, not equal to accessing the kind of distribution channels we are encouraging? I do not mean to say that, uh, that that it is because of the insurance regulations that systemic bias is there. No, the systemic bias exists in our society. This kind of systemic or socio-cultural challenges that women have in terms of making independent decisions or going to some male-dominated places, which could be the point of sale for insurance. So the counterintuitive thought I would like you to reflect upon is the fact that while we are not encouraging to create any specific bias, we also have to inform our policy to be as close to reality as possible. And when we do the more direct gender neutral approach to it, we are possibly reinforcing the existing biases that exist. So that's the approach that we are trying to encourage here. Chimuka, does that speak to your concern, or you may have a follow-up on that before I go to Harry?
Okay, it does speak to my concern, yes, and thank you so much. Maybe just a slight follow-up is that, are we not then failing to address the root cause if we just try to be, if we try to address the gender issues at the stage of maybe product design and all those things? Are we not failing to address the root cause? Why don't we then start from maybe a point where we even address the causes for women to have less access to certain distribution channels or maybe smartphones and all those? Why don't we address that aspect first before we get to the aspect of designing products?
It would be wonderful if we could, but these are such complex socio-economic phenomena which have so much history and how a society evolves and how we have come to be where we are, that it won't be easy to solve it in one go. Of course, we could take positive measures, like whenever a market research is being undertaken for a new product or services, the regulators could encourage them to look at gender specific concerns or challenges that might exist in the market. But just because the regulator is progressive and is gender aware will need not really transform how the society around us is. I think we are all on the right track, but it's a slow process. And hence we'll have to just keep our patience and try to move in the right direction as a whole. It's not a problem or a challenge that only one entity or one line of business could solve possibly. So I totally understand that, and it would be great if we could, but we'll also have to temper our optimism with exactly the realities in there, so that we could try to take those steps where we may have a higher chance of success and creating greater equity and better inclusion going forward.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Harry?
Yes, Manoj, thank you very much for your intervention. I think that you touched upon something very, very important, like disaggregated data. Just to share first, I'll get one, two questions, but I will just to share to the participant over here that we have our, in fact, Toronto Center also has a gender aware supervision toolkit. I've put the link in the website, in the chat room, and it's available on our website, so you can have a look at it. Quite substantial materials available so that we can give you an idea how to address and supervise gender awareness supervision. That's related to what we are taking up in the topic. And also just Manoj, allow me some, take your permission to elaborate if one point. Here we're looking at the role of women and having access to financial product, and we're talking about gender neutral because by default, when you design an insurance product, it tends to relate more to men, men purchasing power, what the man want, instead of reflecting what the woman want. So now for some of you, it tend to be more like surprising why we should start up for women. Remember, inclusiveness, financial access, financial inclusion, these are the building blocks that allow to empower women. If these women are mostly within the informal sector that in majority of the countries are, and if these women are excluded from the financial system, so they will look for another alternative, and the alternatives that there will be there will be much more detrimental to their progress. Because remember, you have some cases where people are coming up promising you interest rate higher than banks, which eventually you're going to throw good money after bad money. So remember Ponzi scheme. So that's where a lot of people get burned. So that's, we would like to draw attention whether these are the things that reinforce. If you create the right system, the ecosystem, you allow women to have avenues to raise funds, micro insurance, that helps them to be more included in the financial system. And by so doing, the company will have the information, say, okay, our customer department say, okay, this type of woman, the type informal business needs this type of product. So let's tailor the micro business side of thing to get these women as a customer. So allowing them access and empower them, it helps to make the country prosper, okay, and growth, and also more inclusiveness, and also contribute to a variety of new products tailored to the women's needs and to be more reflective. Okay, that's why I think more importantly, always look at the consequences of not providing them those avenues. That will be much more detrimental. Okay, Manoj, thank you thank you, Manoj. I hope we have a very much more fruitful discussion down the line. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I invite a couple of further inputs? I see Moses has made a couple of very good points on the chat. Would you like to speak to them, Moses?
Thank you very much, Manoj. Well, yeah, I didn't have a question per se, but I think this module in itself and your presentation and the way you've elaborated these issues were actually an eye-opener. I think I'll speak in the context of my jurisdiction. It has been an eye-opener in the sense that it has allowed me to take notice of the fact that you may think it's everyday business as usual in regulation, whereas you're ignoring some of those critical issues. Like in my jurisdiction, things like statistics pertaining to gender equity is not something that is readily available. And if you come to think of the way we approve products, conventional insurance products, as well as microinsurance products, and legislature in itself, the manner in which it is being constructed in IPEC is not sensitive to gender issues. We've been taking a more neutral approach to coming up with legislation, coming up with products, approval of products. So I think it's something that we need to take into consideration, something that needs to be applied, because it actually have consequences on the market, as well as performance of products in the market. So yeah, it's very profound and a very commendable idea that you put in the post there. Thank you very much.
No, thank you for sharing that, Moses. It is indeed heartening to see that you find the points made both at the module and the presentation thought-provoking. And that's essentially very much the starting point we would like to have. Because, of course, these things are not obvious to us until we take the time to pause and reflect upon it. And then it becomes something, because it is part of our everyday lives. It is not just an insurance problem. I think issues around equity are so very much a challenge of our daily lives. We just sometimes miss it at times. So I appreciate you sharing your thoughts. Any other thoughts? I see, Renata, you made a point around around a disproportionate impact on women or from, let's say, climate risks. Would you like to speak on that? And then I could go to Titus after that. Oh, no, it is Kutemba. Sorry, Kutemba, please go ahead. Kutemba, on your point on how climate risks affect women more?
Just
Yeah.
like I've really said, I did a training with Toronto Center, and there was this component of climate risk and how it affects women. But I think I wasn't very convinced until I had to read the modules and then link it to also climate risk module. So for me, I think the modules were quite conclusive, and they kind of link the risks to women, and I'm able to now relate with them better.
Wonderful. No, thank you for sharing that. Titus, you wanted to make an input?
Yes,
Please go ahead.
thank you, Manoj. The aspect of representation, I'll briefly speak to that because I was skeptical up to until very recently, because I was of the view that, yes, we can emphasize on access as far as on the demand side is concerned, but perhaps pushing also the agenda that there should be more women representation from the supply side and management and the executive side of providers. Perhaps we are pushing it too far. And I didn't even fully agree with the argument, a general argument that women will therefore be more sensitive to designing products that meet the women's needs, because I was of the view of the profile of the woman on the management or executive side is the one that has perhaps no experience with the vulnerable communities. That was my thinking. However, just this, and I met it also in the self-paced modules, they mention that social and cultural constraints may again even discourage women to come and buy and engage the service provider, has made me thinking, and that has changed my perception on the representation side, that indeed the more women we also have on the representation or supply side, okay, the better we shall improve access on the demand side of things. Thank you very much.
Oh, wonderful to hear that, and good to see that you can see your perspectives evolving on things. And in fact, something that just made me remember is that so when I started my career in insurance, I started in an life insurance company in India on the sales team side, and this is 15, 20 years ago, 15, 17 years ago now. And we realized that women generally don't want to come and work at insurance companies in India. Why? Because insurance companies tend to be aggressive sales-focused organizations, and that creates a very masculine, I don't like the word toxic to use, but a very masculine, very high energy, not high energy in a good sense, but a very, very rude working environment. And hence I saw that after finishing my master's, I went to an insurance company. A lot of my friends who were women, girls, went and worked for a banking jobs rather than taking up opportunity at insurance companies, even though the pay was better or whatever. And that is again something that we do not understand, that because of the culture that happens in there, because there is just not enough women present in that office, a certain kind of culture or work behavior takes shape, which becomes the default afterwards. I'm pretty sure that's not how insurance companies are supposed to be. But since it becomes a 99% male dominated workforce, especially on this part of it, at least from my experience in India, what I can say. And that was true for all the other insurance companies, because I spoke with a couple of other people on that as well. So but it is only through better representation of bringing more women in that something like that could be tempered, because I'm very sure people who have that kind of an aggressive approach to it might not be the best suited people to go speak to women who might not be that well informed in terms of what insurance solutions could do for them. Why do we need them? And hence people like these going and selling to them might not be the best sales channel in there. Harry, I see your hand again. Yes, please.
Yes, thank you, Manoj, telling me about how women are leaving the insurance sector and now going to the banking sector because the aggressiveness, toxicity of the culture. I think also one way to tackle, like, to make women more approachable towards the insurance sector, to more product related to them, is there's awareness by the insurance sector as well, the players and the supervisors. I think it goes both ways, the public sector and the private sector. The public sector will have always, the regulator will always have uh, media available, social media programs, TVs, outreach programs. So that you need to be on the ground. You can't do it in an office and writing a blueprint and keep it in the drawer. That need to be translated. You need to relate at grassroots level. You can't relate, take a 10-page contracts and go in a rural area telling people this is your contract. You need to go at basic level, fundamental. So I think that you need, in a way, to reflect the reality. You need to be matching. Okay, you can't say, okay, this is the level of education, financial literacy is different. It varies. So I think what come in hand here is to have a very well articulated financial literacy and outreach program that where women are, okay, we understand women can be intimidated going to an insurance company. Why is it the reverse way around? When the company itself sends its team in various association, women association, business association, where you can conduct campaign and outreach and inform the woman, okay, these are your rights, these are things that you can do, these are the type of product you should avoid, these are the type of work you can buy because it helps you to have an insurance self-cover, and so on and so on. So I think a certain way you have to have this leg of outreach and financial education. It works in hand in hand. One will reinforce each other. Manoj, thank you.
Indeed, indeed. No, very, very, very valid perspectives. Thanks for sharing that, Harry. Any other inputs before we could maybe go ahead to the next part of our discussion? Any other points you'd like to make or insights you'd like to share? I see great inputs from Natasha and Renata as well, where they say not just as women as buyers of insurance, but also as beneficiaries. They should be accommodating of the socioeconomic realities that might exist. Natasha sharing the point on if the wife who is not officially married does not receive good treatment when it comes to, let's say, claim payments or benefit payments in the case of a life insurance or something. And those are all important factors in making it more gender aware. All right. So as I see no hands anymore, we can, of course, we'll have more time to discuss this. So I'll now quickly move on and take us through the next set of slides. So before we actually go and do a deep dive on index insurance and climate risks themselves, since we already spoke about gender, we will now just take us through like climate and weather risks being not gender neutral, the point that was being made, and also we heard during the discussion as well. According to the United Nations, various agencies in there, women and children are 14 times more likely to die in extreme weather disaster events than men. That goes on to show that men have more options of going to safer or secure locations as compared to men when horrible extreme weather events happen. By 2050, climate change will push an extra 158 million more women and girls into poverty. Acute disasters can disrupt essential services, including sexual and reproductive health care, which is definitely going to have a much disproportionate impact on women as compared to men. Women in rural areas suffer substantially greater economic losses from the impacts of climate breakdown than men in developing countries, research has shown, and the gap is likely to widen further. Women tend to lose 8% more of their income to heat stress than male-headed households, and the reduction in income when flood struck was about 3% greater than losses to men. So there is enough information out there. Women and children are more likely to lose their lives in a climate risk event, extreme weather event, as compared to men. Women are more likely to get impacted by the disruption these events cause. Children are more likely to lose their incomes as compared to men when these extreme weather events happen. And we also saw it during the COVID times, didn't we? well during the lockdowns in most of the markets, and I know it's not a pleasant time to think about, but women in the houses tended to have extra responsibility on them, because since everybody is locked in, that did not take away any of the chores that they were supposed to do. They're still supposed to, cook, clean, and everything, but then there was an extra responsibility of making sure that things keep moving. And we see that there have been enough reports out there which led to greater domestic violence cases being reported in there, and women losing their savings more as compared to men, because they tend to save in, under the pillow, or in a box in the kitchen, as compared to men who are more likely to have a bank account and the like. And hence all these things just point to the fact that women generally are climate and weather risks are not gender neutral. They have a disproportionate impact on women as compared to men, no matter what part of the world we are from. Why? Because women have limited access to information, they have limited mobility, they have restricted decision-making capacity, especially financial decision-making capacity, especially in emerging markets. And of course, they have limited access to resources or control over resources as compared to their male counterparts in their households, because majority of the societies tend to be patriarchal, and financial decision-making becomes a male domain as compared to female domain. And a lot of women make the decision to be homemakers, and that somehow takes away their financial independence, so to say, which is unfortunate, so to say. So how can we make climate disaster and risk insurance gender aware? So of course, we saw some of the ways in which inclusive or micro insurance in general could become more gender aware. We would take a look to see how climate and disaster risk insurance could be made more gender aware. And the logic is not any different between any kind of inclusive insurance solution or climate risk insurance solutions per se. And that is pretty simple. Please be aware of the existing differences between men and women in the market and in the society that you're going to operate in when analyzing the situation or or doing your market research or designing your product features, and make sure that you account for those gaps in your product. And those could be under three heads: the context in which you are introducing the product or service, the product itself, and of course the processes around that you're building around the product. If you make sure that you ask the questions or on how does it impact men as compared to women, if X is put as a feature or Y is put as a feature or Z is put as a feature, you're taking very good strides towards making your solution or your interventions gender aware. And let me share an example. SEWA, or the Self-Employed Women's Association in India, offered a health insurance for daily wage women workers against extreme heat. So they designed an index insurance product against extreme heat to save for health insurance or daily wage income loss that women workers may face. And when I say women workers, those workers who are daily wage laborers or who work in the informal economy. So the context was that SEWA found that intense heat in summers, temperatures 45 degrees centigrade and above, is putting millions of poor Indians at risk. And women, especially those with restricted incomes of up to $60 to $70 a month, are amongst the worst affected. As an example, a 40-year-old woman called Lata Ben, a member of the Self-Employed Women's Association, the heat was so unbearable for her that she could not operate her sewing machine inside the tin-roofed house that she was living in, and hence she could not continue or deliver on the work that she was supposed to do. That means heat was not only impacting her health, because of course it's very high temperatures and that's going to have health complications. She was unable to work, so she was losing the wages because of the extreme heat impacting her capacity to work. So the organization designed a health heat wave insurance system, which is a pioneering initiative that addresses the urgent needs of women workers in the informal sector, providing them with the necessary support to cope with extreme heat event. And it was a simple heat index product that basically, if the temperature goes beyond a certain trigger level for a sustained period of 2 days, 3 days, the product will give a payout which was equivalent to. So in Seva, in 2024, this year, they launched a pilot insurance system that covered 52,000 members from different trades in 22 districts in the western state of Gujarat in India. And 46,000 people signed up for it. And 88% of them received benefits from the program that was worth equal to $340,000. Lataben, the example that we saw, the insurance payment was rupees 750, approximately $9 US, which is enough to cover for food and medication for a few days. And that is all you need. So you make sure you understand that, it's women wage workers who generally tend to either work from their home on their sewing machines or something. They have health impact as well as income loss impact because of an extreme weather event such as extreme heat. So an index insurance solution designed for that need not cover for all kinds of losses, but gives her enough benefits that will cover for her emergent needs to meet the challenge, meet the costs of extreme heat, which is paying for medication if needed and paying for the lost income, so to say. And they have done it through a women's sales force. So the Self-Employed Women's Association, as the name suggests, is a women-only organization. So it's led by women member and working on women issues, and at all levels it's women, whether it's the membership or the leadership. And within that, the sales team or the sales force for this product were women as well. Hence, they were able to reach women very easily and they could totally empathize the kind of challenges that they would face. And not only that, this gendered perspective was also brought in as inputs for the product design processes, better understanding the needs of its members, understanding and collecting and interpreting the data, and providing guidance on the geographic and population selection for the pilot and subsequent expansion. So clearly, if we keep women or make sure that we understand the needs, we make an effort to understand the needs in the context of the women customer we are looking to serve, we can come up with products and processes which could speak to the gaps and challenges that women may face. Now, we talked about gender. We also talked about the gendered impact of climate risk on women. Specifically the disproportionate impact of it. Now we will just take a look at index insurance solutions themselves, and just look at some regulatory issues around index insurance solutions going forward. All of us present here know that climate change is going to impact the low-income populations, or everybody, and low-income populations being no exception in the next decades to come. As temperatures would rise, sea levels would rise, and extreme weather events become more frequent in frequency and more severe in their impact, it is going to negatively impact agriculture, livestock, micro and small enterprises, and assets. All these things will get impacted by the different manifestations of climate risk. And this is obviously true. We see that, the typhoons and the storms are becoming more intense and more frequent. The floods are becoming more frequent and more intense. And these are all manifestations of our weather patterns, our climate patterns changing. As you may know, parametric insurance solutions have been around for a while, and they were designed primarily to offer an insurance solution, insurance-oriented solution for climate risks. And the key questions are what is covered. So what does a parametric insurance solution cover? It covers externally quantifiable loss events, most often weather or geological, and loss events highly correlated to financial exposure. So they essentially look at weather parameters such as temperature or humidity or rainfall or water levels or something which has a direct correlation with the assets or the insurable interest being insured through that. So for agriculture, for example, during different stages of a crop, different levels of rainfall is needed below which or above of which there could be losses. And hence, in parametric solutions are designed in a manner that correlates with that requirement and ultimately pays for it in case those triggers are breached. What does it cost? The pricing of parametric solutions is based on the calculated frequency using agreed objective data and based on using agreed objective data sources and the agreed severity and the geographic location and the geographic coverage. And it is coverage period dependent, of course. And how are claims paid? If the data confirms that the conditions have occurred which trigger a payout, the claim is automatically paid. And here the claim process is typically faster than traditional indemnity coverages, and in some contracts can be made even before the event itself occurs. So, and so basically the core elements of parametric contracts or parametric insurance, it has same terms as in any insurance contract. So premium, which is the amount paid to secure the coverage, the sum insured are the maximum amounts returned in case covered event occurs, and policy term, the time during which the coverage is effective. But what is different here is essentially the risk event, which are called trigger events, for example. And these are the measured values which trigger payments or payouts for a covered event. Typical contracts include multiple triggers based on indicated severity. That is paying a percentage of total sum assured for a less severe event or the entire sum assured if the highest trigger is reached or exceeded. So to put it very simply, for any crop or something, you could have, if you have access to the rainfall data for the last 20, 30 years, for any corresponding crop, could be paddy, could be wheat, could be cassava, any other product crop that might be there. Based on the historical data points, we can define the correlated losses if the weather parameter is below that point or ahead of that point. So as you could see in the graph, we see that there are 2 points of trigger points when the payout becomes feasible up to an exit point, which talks about the maximum payout that is possible around it. And essentially this is based on the indexed model of the weather parameter that exists. Pros and cons of index insurance solutions. Adverse selection and moral hazards are minimized. That's a positive because it is objective based on data and the data or parameters are tracked through weather stations or satellites, and hence there is minimal moral hazard or adverse selection possible because it is geographically dependent and weather parameter dependent. It does not require a typical insurance claim assessors. It allows for claim settlement to be quicker and more objective, lowering the administrative cost as well. Of course, basis risk is amongst the biggest challenges when it comes to index insurance. The basis risk is simply put that the index observations are not the same as the experience of the farmer or the end customer. So for example, that if the index insurance product is designed to trigger at 5 millimeter of rain, and you experience 5 millimeter of rain in your farm, but the index or the weather station or the satellite data does not capture that it does not collect or capture the data that 5 millimeter of rain had fallen on your farm, that means that you will not get a payout. And that's essentially the basis risk. It could go on the other side as well, that you might not have experienced any heavy rainfall, for example, but the weather station or the satellite may have erroneously said that there was rainfall in your geography, and it gives you a payout. So you get a payout even though you might not have suffered a loss. Now, that's not a terrible thing to happen, but on the other side, when you actually suffered a loss and no payment is made, that is definitely a challenge for sure. Of course, there is a lack of high quality weather and yield data in many developing countries. And of course, the lack of awareness and enabling environment to promote index insurance solution remains a challenge as well. So as regulators, index insurance solutions are relatively new and definitely a bit more complex than the traditional insurance products that we have been aware of as regulators or market players, especially in emerging markets. It's not that they are new, they have been around for more than a decade now, but to be regulating them is an evolving field of work in our region. And A2II had, of course, you have gone through the self-paced modules on that, but also the A2II has produced a document on best practices on regulating index and parametric insurance solutions. And I would encourage you to find that on A2II's website and go through it. And when it comes to regulating index insurance solutions, the general principles are obvious. Some of the rules of thumb could be that clearly differentiate between index insurance solutions and weather derivatives, ensuring that there is an insurable interest. So differentiating between index insurance and weather derivatives. Index insurance and weather derivatives are similar in the sense that both are based on the historical experience of a particular weather parameter, rainfall, temperature, and the like. And they get triggered when the threshold is crossed based on the pre-agreed notions. And the insurable interest here is in the sense that the farmer would like to buy an index insurance solution because it feels that, or she feels that, if the rainfall goes beyond 5 millimeters, for example, it is going to damage her or his crop. So there is an insurable interest, and then index insurance could be drawn around it based on historical data. But a weather derivative need not have an insurable interest. It could be sold as a financial product or a simple bet on the weather patterns themselves. So that's the key difference between a weather derivative that anybody could buy should somebody be offering it, and it need not have an insurable interest in place. While an index insurance is largely designed around an insurable interest, it could be the agriculture output dependent upon the weather pattern, could be temperature, could be humidity, could be rainfall. So that's essentially the distinguishing factor between index insurance and weather derivatives. Index insurance regulation should clearly differentiate between index insurance and indemnity insurance, and also differentiate between different categories of index insurance themselves. So of course, index insurance could be across multiple indices. For example, it could be weather parameter based, where you take historical weather data of the last 20, 30 years and create an index that projects the potential losses. It could also be on yield. So if you have yield data available for a particular crop over the last 10, 15, 20 years, you can design an index around it that this is the minimum yield that is possible, and that's the maximum yield that's possible. And anything below and above or deviation from that, an index insurance solution could be designed around it. It is important that the structuring of the underlying indices are driven by objectivity and transparency. What it means to say is that, it should be easy for everybody to understand and anybody to verify that index. In other words, like the data sources that are being used should be credible. It could be the local meteorological agencies of the government or satellite data or government data, either it is on yield or something. And the index should clearly show that there is a correlation between the actual loss event that happens in case of the weather parameters being below or above the trigger points, and hence important to be verified by an independent agencies. Digitizing index insurance should be considered by regulators to reduce the cost of distribution and to enable scale up. So regulatory or policy environment could encourage use of technology for better distribution and monitoring of weather parameters for an index insurance solutions. Also, the recommendations are around product design, marketing, and claims, where a checklist is being provided by the document, which talks about that an index insurance product, when it is being designed or approved by the regulator, should talk about whether it is a group product or an individual product, clearly defines the insurable interest, clearly defines the index used, has an assessment of the basis risk potential, deductibles, if any, triggers, rate of payment, and the like. All of these needs to be in there. Also, the regulators should encourage client education and awareness as part of the marketing efforts, and also should clearly define how the claims process would happen and how the intimation and payouts would be happen, and grievances, if any, how would those be handled as well. The consumer protection part of index insurance solution largely focuses on the basis risk, the challenge of basis risk that happens. Basis risk, as I mentioned previously, is the difference in the on the index based data information and the real life experience that a customer or a farmer may have. And it is both. Maybe the index was designed in a manner that it does not correlate with the loss experience that is could be there due to the variation in the weather parameter, rainfall, temperature, or something. And hence, it is a good idea for the regulators to ask for detailed correlation analysis between the historical stimulated payouts and actual losses. So if you design an index product based on the rainfall data of the last 20 years, that index product should then be able to predict that based on, let's say there was a drought 3 years ago and the rainfall had fallen below a certain level. Is this index able to retrospectively project that yes, there would be a loss and a trigger would be paid out because you already have an experience that 3 years ago there was a drought. So detailed correlation analysis at the design stage of the product could help you minimize basis risk from an ex ante or at a design stage. But not all basis risk can be addressed ex ante. So ex post, like when a product has been put in place, there is still a variation between the observed experience of a farmer, like, there is a drought, but the trigger is not breached, or there was heavy rainfall, but the trigger is not breached. Maybe there could be use of secondary triggers. So there could be more than one trigger. So there is one trigger, of course, is that weather parameters, like I said, 5 mm rainfall. So if there is one breach, one model which is saying that, okay, satellite-based data is not capturing the fact that there was a rainfall of more than 5 mm, and hence there needs to be a payout. We could possibly have a second trigger through the local weather monitoring station. And if there the weather monitoring station data tells us that the rainfall has been beyond 5 mm, then that could be used as the second trigger for a payout to be happening. Of course, potential consideration of ex gratia payouts could be there, that maybe the index is not capturing some of the more sensitive areas or certain geographies because of the geographical uniqueness. Maybe some payouts could be made directly to the farmers so that they do not feel a bad experience with the product. Lastly, on prudential supervision, the regulator should consider the following aspects of pricing, reserving, and solvency functions. Pricing of index insurance products should be done on an actuarial basis and preferably based on appropriate deterministic and stochastic methods. Pricing should be reviewed on an annual basis and based on the claims experience, and there should be scope for reducing or increasing the pricing to maintain the profitability of the products while still ensuring they give good value for money. And the reserving of index insurance should take into account suitable provisions for the outstanding claims reserve and unearned premium reserve, depending on the specific structures of the underlying product. This is where I end my presentation. Happy to take a couple of questions before I hand it over to Renata to take us through a case study.
Manoj, there's an interesting comment by Obed in the chat.
By whom?
think-
Okay.
Obed, yeah.
Okay. Obed, would you like to speak to your point that you have made? And then I'll come to you, Harry.
Yeah.
Obed?
Hello?
Yes, please go ahead. We can hear you.
Okay. So, no, I was just following the discussion on the need to put in place certain measures that take into consideration the needs of women and indeed girls, which of course I do completely agree with. But yeah, what is happening on the ground now is, I don't know, I don't want to call it over focus on women and girls, such that to an extent we are also we may also be creating a situation where the man or the boy child is being left behind in terms of these support, because I would want to apply the concept of proportionality to this aspect as well. you understand? So I don't know if there's a way we are managing this to an extent that, in as much as yes, we recognize that women and girls do need maybe more support compared to the boy child or the men folk, but we do not completely neglect the other side to an extent where at some point we may just discover that we have a generation of men who were previously excluded from this support that we are offering in the different aspects of life. Because I'll give an example of, in terms of maybe education and whatever, what is happening in rural areas is whenever these development organizations want to go into a rural area, they want to seek out girls, boys. But remember, in these rural areas, parents may just be finding it as difficult to support their boy child to go into school. So you have girl children who are more educated, well supported to an extent where there's this financial liberation, so to say. They're able to move out and, progress in life. But the boys continue tending to feuds and all that, such that to an extent that when these are growing up now, they may reach a stage where we are now, and we have more educated women, whereas women who are well stabilized and all that, compared to the men folk. So I don't know if there's a way we can balance that out to an extent where we are just careful to get to a point where we don't tilt the scale too much, and then we have to come back and say, how do we support guys now to come to this point? Yeah, so that was my thinking around that.
Very interesting. If somebody would like to, before I share my perspective on this, but somebody from the group would like to speak to this. Swam, I see you have your hand up. Would you like to speak to what Obed was just mentioning?
Yes,
If
I
yes, please go.
would.
Yes, please go ahead.
And I understand the sentiments around it. I would just like to caution the perspective around how women have consistently been excluded from a lot of these conversations. We have been excluded from the considerations in terms of our training, in terms of our value. And I say this, for example, right? In Namibia, and tomorrow we're voting for our election, and it is a female candidate. And the whole concept around it is really, there's certain like gender, so I'm trying to be very politically correct, but they are very concept is around the fact that, like, oh, she's a woman, so we do not trust her ethics, we do not trust her ability or capabilities. But she has been for the past 40 years a politician. So it is always this gender context wherever exists. And yes, I do understand the boy child and their inclusion and everything around it. I just feel that men have always just been empowered, and it shouldn't be a threat that women are also going to be empowered in certain aspects, and the men will be left behind. Like, it is not, yeah, it isn't a consideration for me.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else would like to speak to on this topic? It's very interesting, and I think, yeah, Monica, please go ahead.
Manoj, I think I was just thinking about the definition of gender and gender equity. And I think usually the default is when you talk about gender, people think automatically it's about dealing with women and females. But it also talks about men. It's just looking at how the distribution of resources, or in a sense, power, is it fair? Are the opportunities fair to both men and women in essence? So it's not just focusing on women alone. The problem with society and what Swama has alluded to is that for a long time, its power has really been in the hands of males. So now it's trying to shift that and try and make it fair, try and bring the ones who are really being marginalized up to sort of be at the same level, equity and fairness and all that. So I think we shouldn't run to think about just women, but think of different situations where also men would need to be brought up to, to sort of enjoy that fairness. But it's sort of unfortunate that most of the time it's the women who need that sort of support in society because of the way everything is structured at the moment. Yeah.
No, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else who would like to speak on this? Yeah, so my thoughts on this is essentially very much along the lines of what Monica mentions, that yes, I mean, any effort which is trying to create a positive discrimination might have certain impacts, as Obed was mentioning, and they need not necessarily be totally unfounded. But we would have to give it a reality check and just look at everything else around us and look at where we are. I think even if those interventions out there might be creating more educated girls than boys in some of the rural areas in some of our countries, in general, the systemic gap between men and women is decidedly in favor of men, whether it comes to access to assets, access to resources, access to the networking, everything. And any form of direct or invisible sources of power. Uh, it is largely male dominated, and that's largely true across the board. Some of the European societies might have made more progress onto this as compared to other parts of the world, but those challenges do exist. So immediately there is, I would say that there is a lot of rationale for us to look at ways in which we could empower women more. But Obed, your point is valid as well. The intervention need not create other biases in our society. But the only thought I would end my thought with on this is on the fact that even if it creates a slight imbalance for the next 20 years, the next girl child born to an educated mother would by default, and hopefully the son coming out being born by an educated mother, would be having better chances of access to education and better livelihoods. And hopefully that would tend to create a more gender equitable society going forward. So I would not dismiss the concern offhand, because, of course, we all have our lived experiences. But I would just say that ultimately that system is decidedly in favor of men. And largely any intervention should ideally focus on creating the next generation, starting at a more equal footing than what maybe our generation or the generation of our parents did. I'll stop at that. I'll go to Harry first and then to you, Kofi. Harry.
Yeah, Manoj, thank you very much. I think conversation becoming very interesting, Manoj. And also, just to point something, I think just to point out something pertaining to climate risk, and some people are still like, still looking at the connection woman climate risk. Where does that fit in the equation? I think Africa gives us a very good example. Climate change has devastating impact, and we know in Africa and in quite a few part of the region as well as the world, women, they have rural and urban migration. People from the rural area come to to the cities and work, and they go back. And those in rural areas, they have their farming. Now imagine you have your crops get devastated, or you have your shops in town where you work get affected by flooding. So you find yourself like you have not made necessary arrangement for insurance to protect your small business. And also suddenly you come back after you have a big flooding and everything is gone, your inventory is gone, your place where you have your business is gone, and you see yourself like suddenly so much of in debt. So this is your indication the how climate is related with women and its impact. So these are the practical example to give you, and also those who come to who live move from the rural and urban migration. Eventually, when this thing happens, when you have the impact of climate risk on this segment of population, you end up with a displaced population. If in the rural areas there's no job, and where you have your business is gone by flood, eventually you will have, as any human being, will look for a much better place where you want to restart your life. So that tell you, okay, now moving, you need to move somewhere else. Moving somewhere else entail more expenses, more costs, starting from scratch, more expenses. So all these tend to boil down to reinforce there's a cost element to it. So that's why it is important that women are aware of different products. And also you look at the connection between climate, the impact of climate on women and displaced population eventually. How this end up in a situation where you didn't account for at the beginning, but you say, okay, we had people from why these people are moving? Because, well, the area where they're working, suddenly the dam got burst, the river started overflowing, it affected entire regions. You don't have a livelihoods earnings on a day-to-day basis. They had to displace by even if you're moving to another part of the countries or another part or cross border to another country. So these are facts and parcel of life that's happening. So climate risk is becoming more unpredictable. Becoming more predictable. You have more people migrating, looking for better living, but also all the insurance industry looking at that picture the way we're looking at it. So I think that's a lot of work to be done. I think it's come to regulator. The regulator need to be on the ground listening and importing the knowledge. Climate risks have a much wider implications than we anticipated. And also that is eventually you need the macro pictures at policy level. That's what my intervention, Manoj.
And that's very pertinent because climate risk manifestations have so many different ways in which they're impacting, and forced or unforced migration is a part of it. And unfortunately, that is going to become more and more present as a part of our lives and reality. So indeed, the industry would have to take into account, and so would the supervisors as well, to enable the right solutions. Kofi, over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Manoj, and thank you for all the comments that have come through. That give me the sense we are deeply thinking through the issues and see how they apply on the ground. Just one thing I want to say. The issue is about gender equity. We want to get some equity, gender equity. And so it is not to disadvantage one gender or the other. It is to see equity, because after all, you need the two genders to optimize benefits for society. So you are looking at equity here. So the question is, what does the data say? If the data says that one gender is disadvantaged in a particular situation, then that gender would have to be given some help. Okay, so I believe that is the concept, the principle behind it. And so depending on the situation, the context, and the issues we are talking about, the question may be, what does the data say? And whatever the data says, and there is inequity, we would have to attend to that inequity. But as Manoj says, often this has tended to be on the female gender being disadvantaged, and therefore they needing that help to achieve that equity. But I believe the objective there is gender equity. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yes, definitely. I mean, the most optimal outcome is that we could reach a stage where there is no discernible bias that could be observed in favor of or against any gender, be it women or men. It is not the idea that, as Kofi mentions, the idea is not to give advantages to women, so to say, by keeping men down. No, no, no. The idea is that hopefully women would tend to enjoy the same degree of control over their lives that on average male does, and I think that's where we would like to go forward. Swama, I see your hand up, so please go ahead.
Yes, sorry, I'm just very passionate about this topic. And please forgive me in terms of my wording, but I've always said, and this is in terms of conversations I've had with my colleagues and just in general living in Namibia, I have always said the fact that in Namibia, men tend to, okay, and again, it's a bit sensitive, but they want the same rights as a white man. So it really is around certain things, and we have a whole history of gender-based violence. There are a lot of aspects where women are not equated, or there isn't a belief in terms of our worth and our contribution to society. So it literally is a concept where our men just do want to have the same rights as a white man, and also because it's been apartheid and there's a whole systemically issue around it. But I think it isn't brought up enough, because for me we need to acknowledge our history and then do better. It is The issue shouldn't be, oh, we're going to ignore that it ever happened or the above. We can acknowledge it and move forward. But if we just disregarding the fact that this ever happened, then there isn't really room to like move on. Sorry, I'm just very passionate around
No.
the scenario.
We are immensely grateful for you to share your thoughts like this, and I think you bring up the point and you make it very poignantly that gender is a very, very complex issue. It's something that impacts our daily lives and the societies that we come from. And while we might have different variations in India where I live and have my family and everything in as compared to the places that you are in. And those are genuine lived realities of our lives. And it is not a very simple box ticking exercise that if we do this, we would be able to take away all the disadvantages and and the handicaps that one gender has in our societies. And insurance alone is not going to be enough. So the one thing that we can hope to do is that at least in the work that we do, we are just aware of those realities and try to take the steps which could make our world slightly better, and hopefully for our children or our children's children going forward, we would have a more equitable world where these things, which are realities of our life, are possibly a distant historical fact. Obed, very last point, because then we'll have to move forward. Yes. Go ahead, Obed. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Just to clarify that I am not anti-gender equity.
Oh no. That we totally understand
that
that.
is
Yes.
being put in place. Yeah, I'm all for that. Yeah, like I think the only concern was that we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that, of course, we want to reach an equitable standard, but in doing so, we shouldn't then be pushing the one side. We shouldn't find ourselves in a situation where we start pushing down the male folk as we start trying to raise up the female folk. It would be best if there's any minimal interventions we can put in place to maintain maybe where this with this level we want to achieve is, and then bring up the female folk to that level, instead of where we find ourselves, we've pushed the men folk down so much. Yeah, and then again, we're not reaching an equitable state. So we really just need to be aware. Have we reached an equitable state? Are we going down this side? Are we going down that side? Like Kofi said, we need to have a certain balance in terms of proportionally applying the interventions that we are putting in place so that we reach that equitable stage. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, we do not want to move to a matriarchal system as well, which would then develop the same challenges that the current patriarchal way of things are right now. We would like to have greater equity and greater access for everybody, and hopefully that will be a world we live in. Renata, I'll now hand over to you both for your comment and then also for the slides you will take us through. So Renata, over to you now. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Manoj. Thank you for all those interesting comments. You know, it's never too late as a woman, right? I wish to remind all the ladies on this call that more than 40 years ago, I was one of the first actuaries, female actuaries in Belgium. It was quite interesting. However, I never considered me as, you know, as woman. I was just a student actually with all the others. And I think this is, how we should look at gender. We should not make it a point. We should just, continue with the stream. And it takes time. It takes time. 40 years later, we have more than 50% of the actual students being a female. So ladies, there is hope. There is hope, right? And it's a gradual process. It's a gradual process. So, Manoj, I would like to add a comment on your last slide, which was related to my profession, where you were talking about pricing and reserves. So, especially this aspect of reserves is quite important to look at when we are dealing with index-based insurance. Why? Well, in majority of the cases, premiums are paid upfront, are single premiums. And in some jurisdictions, you have rigid regulations how to calculate unearned premium reserves, how to calculate outstanding claim reserves. If you apply those rules on index-based insurance, then of course you may end up at the end of your insured period without anything in your savings account, if I can use that terminology. So that aspect is quite important. And as we are with many supervisors on this call, I wish to highlight that this is an aspect that supervisors have to look at in the light of the nature of index-based insurance. This will make the life of actuaries dealing with actuarial reports easier, right, Kofi?
Yes, Renata. Very well.
So we cannot apply our traditional rules on unearned premium reserve on index-based insurance, because then at the end we will end up with zero. We cannot apply our traditional actuarial models for outstanding claim reserves on index-based insurance, because we will end up with nothing. And then, of course, our CEO and our board members won't be happy when we disclose them how much they have to pay given an insured event occurred. So this is quite an important aspect.